Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Little Acts of Kindness. This will be Part 67, Chapter 67, entitled Rules. Izuku locked his door and started walking towards the train station. He reached the bottom of the stairs before he heard a door open. Glancing back up, he saw Maboroshi locking his door. Izuku continued on. "Tenrei, get back here! No, Tenrei!" Maboroshi called out. Izuku heard footsteps behind him, and he turned around just as the dog ran into him. Izuku bit his tongue to prevent crying out as he was knocked to the ground. The dog whined, almost as if apologizing, before starting to lick his face. "Tenrei," Maboroshi said scoldingly, and the dog was pulled away. "I am so sorry. He managed to pull the leash out of my grip. Are you okay? He didn't hurt you, did he?" A hand was offered in front of him. Izuku ran a sleeve over his face, wiping away the dog slobber, and when he stopped the hand was still there, so he took it. It's fine," Izuku said, wincing and rubbing at his mouth as he tasted a hint of copper. "He just startled me." "That's good." Maboroshi turned towards the dog. "Bad dog," he said, tapping the dog's nose gently. Tenrei whined. "Anyways, you're heading to the train station, right? I usually walk Tenrei in that direction in the morning, which I think you know since we see each other a lot. Would it be awkward to ask if we walk together in the morning? Like, I'm sure you noticed I'm a chatty person. You don't have to talk to me or even listen to what I'm saying, but it'd be nice to walk with someone, and talk to someone other than Tenrei. Not that Tenrei's not great, but apparently human companionship is something a person should have, and my coworkers aren't really nice. Oh, I'm rambling again, aren't I? Sorry." Izuku hesitated, but then shrugged. "Not every day," he finally answered, deciding that maybe Maboroshi's presence wouldn't be so bad. The man beamed at him. "Thanks. Anyways, I walk Tenrei a lot. Once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once later at night, and I always try to play with him in the park once a week. I'm worried if he's getting enough exercise, especially if he's in the apartment all day. So I thought about getting a dog sitter, but they are so expensive that I wouldn't be able to. I was also thinking maybe I could get another dog, but 2 large dogs is too much for the apartment to handle, so I'd have to find a smaller dog. There's also a chance if I get another dog that the two won't like each other." Maboroshi started rambling as they walked, Tenrei walking between them. Izuku listened, but didn't interrupt, finding the constant chatter nice. It was different from the car rides with Aizawa and Yamada, but it still felt nice, and made him feel less alone. How old was Maboroshi? The man looked around Yamada's age, but he kind of felt younger to Izuku, like he was only a few years older than him. The time actually seemed to pass quickly as he arrived at the train station, and Maboroshi said goodbye. Izuku gave a nod and a small wave, before entering onto the train and heading to school. The day passed with lessons passing as usual, and soon Izuku was sitting down waiting for the afternoon lesson to start. From what Aizawa said during homeroom, he would spend the first half hour explaining what the Civil War was, and then after that they would go to a gym and be allowed to experiment with their quirks. The second bell rang, and the class quieted down as Aizawa shuffled from his sleeping bag to the podium. Aizawa stood in front of the class, drawings on the blackboard behind him. Everyone was quiet, waiting for the teacher to speak. Izuku pulled out his notebook, preparing to take down notes. "This exercise is a multiple-day exercise. Your parents have already been emailed, informing them, and that if they had any complaints they could email Nezu. In this exercise, you will be split into 2 teams, heroes and villains. This is a combined exercise of both Class 1A and 1B, so you'll be working with people from Vlad's class." Aizawa pointed a stick at the top of the blackboard, showing rules, which was underscored. "Today I'll be going over the basic win conditions, and the rules for the heroes." Ida raised his hand. "Ida," Aizawa said, staring at the boy as he gave permission for him to ask his question, though Izuku suspected it would have been answered regardless, yet Aizawa let Ida ask his question instead of making him wait. "What about villains?" the boy asked, tilting his head. "Once the teams are selected, the villains will be given the rules and goals they have, because this exercise is attempting to reconstruct how villains act out in the real world, as much as possible. The hero team will not be informed of what the villains can and can't do to keep them on their toes," Aizawa explained, gesturing with his stick to an area of the blackboard which showed a little doodle of Midnight taking down some stick-figure villains and giving a victory sign. Izuku blinked, as he took a better look at the blackboard and saw there were a ton of little doodles around it. Obviously Midnight must have drawn them during lunch break. Izuku flipped a page as he filled in notes about what was explained so far. "Now, the heroes' win conditions are as follows. Capture or subdue the villains before they complete their win goals. Aizawa started pointing to the first bullet point on an area listed as conditions that had 3 bullet points. He moved to the second bullet point. Or prevent the villains from completing their win goals before the deadline. The final win condition is capturing the leader of the villains, he said, pointing to the third bullet point. That sounded like a lot of ways for the heroes to win, especially capturing the villain team's leader. Would the leaders of each team be announced to the other teams? If so, the villains would have a major disadvantage, as the heroes would likely target that student. Aizawa-sensei mentioned them making this like real life, so they probably wouldn't know. The hero team will be restricted in that they can't destroy property. Doing so will result in that person's grade being lowered, and you will have to do the usual paperwork. Villain team will be exempt from doing the property damage paperwork for this exercise, Aizawa explained, gesturing to another doodle. This time it had Yamada-sensei and a destroyed building and him crying with a paper that had money signs on it. If Izuku was on the hero team, he would have to be really careful using voice not to cause property damage. He knew Yamada-sensei did a lot of training to get the right pitch to not hurt his surroundings. Izuku was nowhere close to that level. He only just had control over how loud his voice was. Heroes have a designated base, their hero agency, where they'll have food and water to sustain them. Their location will be towards the center of the city. Each team will get a map of the city, though the heroes will get a more in-detailed map, he said, pointing to 2 drawn maps. One had a bunch of details drawn, the other was just a basic map with the bare minimum needed for it to be usable. Aizawa mentioned heroes having a designated base, but what about villains? Did they have a base Aizawa wasn't mentioning? Or did they not have a base at all and they had to set up their own location? If they had to set up their own location, what would they do for food and water? That might be a good way for a hero to flush them out if needed, by blocking off routes to any sources of food. He assumed they would be in a simulated city, so how realistic would it be? Would the shops have stuff in it? Would it be like a battle simulation and just be empty? Each team will have a leader, and heroes must obey their leader or have points deducted. The leader has a final say in what happens. Aizawa pointed to another doodle. This one had Nezu with a crown on his head. The heroes had to obey their leader. Did the same go for villains? Izuku had read a few news articles of infighting amongst villains causing heroes to capture them, so it was something that happened, but would they allow it? If any infighting happened, that would be another advantage for the heroes. Depending on what the villains had to do, this would be pretty stacked in the heroes' favor. "Any questions?" Aizawa asked, lowering the stick. Asui raised her hand. He nodded to her. "Yes, Asui." "This doesn't give us much to work with." "Correct. The heroes won't know what the villains' goals are. They will have to do their best to stop the crimes as they happen, much like real heroes. You, of course, are allowed to try and investigate what the villains are planning during the planning phase, but if you're caught by a villain, then that student will receive detention and be unallowed to convey any of what they heard." Aizawa pointed to the bottom corner, which had a doodle of him with his hair raised and a scarf around and over a crying student who was sitting at a desk. So, they would allow spying, so the villains would have to be careful where they planned stuff. And it would be the villains who were planning. The heroes only had to figure out how they were going to deal with the crimes as they happened. "Would that student still be able to act on that information?" Jiro asked, not bothering to raise her hand. Aizawa nodded. "So long as the hero leader doesn't tell them to do something else, then yes." So if the villains did catch someone spying on them, it was best to change their plan. Did the villains have to report that they found someone? What if they used the opportunity as a trap? Sero raised a hand, and after Aizawa gestured at him, he asked, "How will the teams be picked, and leaders?" That was a good question. "It is completely random." Silence filled the room for a moment, no one else raising their hands for a question. Completely random, like the sports festival was, which meant not at all, and the teachers already knew what was going to happen? Or would it actually be random? "Teams will be announced Monday. You will have 1 week to plan and get to know your teammates. Monday the 16th, the Civil War will start and last until the morning of Thursday." The morning? When in the morning? Izuku hesitantly raised his hand. "Yes, Midoriya?" Aizawa asked. "What time in the morning?" "That information will be included in the rule packet that will be handed out when teams are assigned." Izuku nodded at that, jotting it down in his notebook and flipping another page. Wait, why would something like that be included in the packets? It was a simple thing. The end time of the event. Unless... Izuku frowned and wrote one last note. "Do best to gather information on other teams' rulebooks. Would be a huge advantage for heroes to know the villains' plans, or villains it would be a good idea to see what the heroes can and can't do." Closing his notebook, he placed it into his bag and got up, heading towards the locker room. He changed into his hero outfit, and soon the class was gathered at an empty field. "Go ahead and experiment. If you need any help, come ask. Izuku wondered what he should work on, how to experiment, before remembering one of his questions he had jotted down in the cat cafe. Glancing over at the blonde, he hesitated, before nodding to himself and going over. Kaminari, can I try something with you? The blonde smiled widely. Sure, dude. What do you have in mind? With that, the two started experimenting. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 67 of Little Acts of Kindness. We're moving into the Civil War arc, which is probably one of my favorite parts of this fic. There is a small little additional scene that's at the end of this chapter, but it was written by another author, and so while it was included by this author, I didn't know if the other author would be cool with me podficking that portion, so I left it out. But check it out if it's something you're interested in. Again, this is Chapter 67 of the fic, and the links to all the fics are always in the description, so you can easily check it out on AO3 if you want to take a look. So let me know your overall thoughts and reactions to this fic so far. Again, I'm super excited for this arc that's coming up. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.